Hideo Kojima has been designing globally important video games since the 1980s. In this electronic virtual essay, we'll be discussing how, starting with 1988's Snatcher, going all the way to this year's upcoming Death Stranding 2, Hideo Kojima has embodied the concept of a so-called postmodern artist, by his own admission multiple times. Kojima's early masterpiece, Snatcher, hasn't been played by many in the West, but its themes may have become more prescient here in 2025 than ever. Snatcher takes place in Neo-Kobe City on an artificial island off the coast of Japan. You play as Gillian Seed, newest member of Junker, a force of secret police detectives tasked with hunting down the Snatchers and their hidden weak point. Snatchers are basically a combination of body snatchers and Terminators. But to understand Snatcher's subject matter, or how it's a vital form of postmodern art, you have to understand its tone, which you might call broadly a form of postmodern satirical dramedy.
We are a new race! Our goal is to snatch all of the world's leaders and then achieve total control of human thought and worldwide racial unification.
You're insane. Humanity won't be so easily dominated. You underestimate the strength of the human spirit.
I think not. In the same way as the Nazis, our strategy begins with the overpowering of the spirit of the people. We will strike at you humans' weakest point, the most primitive part of your psychological makeup, your suspiciousness and fear.
Postmodernism, I'm using this word a lot. What does it mean, right? Well, the Encyclopedia Britannica has a great definition. Postmodernism, in Western philosophy, is a late 20th century movement characterized by broad skepticism, subjectivism, or relativism, a general suspicion of reason, and acute sensitivity to the role of ideology in asserting and maintaining political and economic power. In this context, I mean that Snatcher is postmodern in the same way as a postmodern novel which might treat, so-called sacred cows in a tongue-in-cheek way. I'm thinking here of novels like Flight to Canada or The Heirs of Columbus by Gerald Visner. Here, I'll read you a quick synopsis of Flight to Canada. This is from ebsco.com. Flight to Canada by Ishmael Reed is a novel set in the early 1860s that explores the journey of a runaway slave, Raven Quickskill, who escapes to Canada in search of freedom from his master, culminating in a commentary on the complexities of freedom, race, and identity. As the story progresses, Raven evolves from a naive idealist into a more aware individual, grappling with the harsh realities of a society still rife with oppression, even in Canada. Reed's characters, while exaggerated and farcical, serve to critique historical narratives surrounding slavery and the Civil War, particularly the legendary Uncle Tom's Cabin. Ultimately, Flight to Canada invites readers to reconsider established myths and narratives about race and history, showcasing the nuanced and often contradictory experiences of its characters in a satirical yet thought-provoking manner. End quote. Flight to Canada dares to be a satirical comedy set during the era of the American Civil War, and as the synopsis explains, it sort of critiques and it satirizes some of the narratives surrounding the story of the Civil War. The Heirs of Columbus by Gerald Visner that I mentioned, as Wikipedia explains, is a novel that inverts the historical record, reimagining Christopher Columbus as a descendant of Mayans and Sephardic Jews who now wants to return home, that is, to America. So why am I bringing this up? Well, in postmodernism, the genre/worldview, I guess you could call it, that Snatcher's creator Hideo Kojima has publicly embraced to describe his games, in postmodernism, nothing is sacred. Postmodernism is about challenging all grand narratives or systems that are meant to ostensibly explain or understand human behavior or human society, human history, as each of these things, by their very nature as human systems, are postmodernism presumes, incomplete. If I could sum up this philosophy, it would be with the phrase, "been there, done that." It's about being world-wise enough not to get duped into believing that any of us human beings ever has all the answers or can ever be rid of the flaws inherent to human nature. We'll always be outside heaven, boss. And I think Kojima's games are always kind of breaking that to us. Which brings us back to Snatcher.
Look at how the Snatcher problem has caused such wild unrest. No matter how much science advances or how high we set our ideals, we eventually begin to suspect each other, to hate each other, and then to kill each other. The Snatchers are nothing more than a tool for bringing out this reaction. I am simply using the Snatchers to elicit the true nature of the human animal.
Snatcher, simply put, is an adventure game which is ironically suspicious of the art of deduction itself. And the game, it turns out, is actually quite a bit about prejudice. About judging things by their cover, by the surface level. Snatcher, like later Kojima titles like Metal Gear Solid 2, wants to interrogate the interrogator, shine the spotlight as much on the criminal as the assumptions and biases of the investigator, of you, of the one playing it, and even the society that shaped you.
What? Ah, it's just a crow.
Stupid bird.
I'd argue that that's why we need Snatcher nowadays, and its message never to take anything, any dogma or system of understanding, so seriously as to make it into a religion. In Snatcher, everything goes against the stereotype. Bad guys present as neat and tidy Caucasians, while Santa Claus and Napoleon Bonaparte have become the same Chinese man with 10 different jobs. But it's important to point out that you can't really call this racial humor or something like that, because the butt of the joke is never a single race or group, but just our universal capacity as humans to fear and make assumptions based on the superficial. When it comes to subjects like race and racism, Metal Gear Solid 5 would see Kojima returning to many of Snatcher's themes. After Snatcher came Policenauts, first released on the PC-98 platform in 1994. This game was postmodern on a level not yet seen before, arguably, in the medium. The key to understanding postmodernism, as I said, is by the phrase "been there, done that," and Policenauts, like Snatcher, carries us across by utilizing what you might call fourth wall breaking character designs, story beats, music, and themes, all of them basically derived from outside movies, TV, music, and other games. This is tied to explaining why Kojima does things like break the fourth wall and leave in supposed time paradoxes, why he bases so many of his characters off of actors from famous Hollywood films. And this brings us to a really important fundamental concept to postmodernism, at least if we're talking about the kind sort of furthered by the postmodern French philosopher Jean Baudrillard. We're touching on what's known as the hyperreal, or what's realer than real. It's somewhat complex to explain this idea, but basically the goal of achieving a total sense of hyperreality explains why Kojima's first two games are much more than just, knockoffs of Blade Runner and Lethal Weapon, or why Metal Gear Solid 2 is doing more than just knocking off Titanic with its characters Jack and Rose. While Snatcher's postmodern message was not to take surface-level appearances for reality, Policenauts expanded Hideo Kojima's postmodern aesthetic in lots of ways. This was interactive cinema, as it tells you on the cover, a playable movie that, in postmodern fashion, was hyperreal. So what do I mean? Well, it's a buddy cop movie that you can play, bizarrely set in a Los Angeles and Tokyo-ified version of a space colony. That's larger than life, you know what I mean? That no movie starring Mel Gibson and Danny Glover is going to take place in a space colony. But that's the kind of crazy, hyper-real sort of stuff that you can only get, or at least at this time, you could only really get in a video game. The whole concept of postmodern hyperreality could be summed up by the phrase realer than real, coined, again, by French thinker Jean Baudrillard, a name familiar, hopefully, to longtime viewers of Futura Sound Productions. Hyperreality in both Policenauts and Snatcher and all Kojima's games is on full display. As a postmodern artist, Kojima knows his audience, he knows what we know, and draws on our shared cultural, musical, and artistic vocabulary all the time. That's how his games achieve their postmodern sense of hyperreality. For example, they star characters, as I sort of hinted at, modeled on famous actors like Sean Connery, Mel Gibson, Sting, and Danny Glover. That's a Snatcher calendar. It's a calendar. Wait, the year on this is 2047. That's 7 years from now. Oh, he told me he got that as a prize from somewhere. I don't know the details, but apparently if you mailed in those tokens, this company would send you that or some other prize. That's right, I think it had to do with some video game. Yeah, that crowd does this kind of thing a lot. Collect all the tokens in a set and they give you stuff in return. Why do you think it's for 2047? An attempt at postmodern art? Hey, check out the guy in the middle. He looks a little like Jonathan, don't you think? If you change the hair and the clothes. Come to think of it, that strange dude in the lobby thought you were somebody else, didn't he? Yeah, something Seed. Real weird first name. I guess you just have one of those faces. But with the Metal Gear Solid series, which followed Policenauts, Hideo Kojima, as a postmodern artist, entered a new frontier, both as an individual artist and, dare I say, for the entire medium of video games. Metal Gear Solid, one of the most iconic IPs in the industry, tackled the subject of postmodern warfare, of high-tech warfare, in other words, of how society is shaped by the technology of war, and other related topics, like nuclear proliferation and the rise of terrorism, and sectarian violence in the post-Cold War order. MGS3, drawing influence from 2002's GTA Vice City, applied hyperreality to a sense of history, giving players a digital facsimile of the year 1964 that treats it as though 1964 were another planet, not just another year in human history, but a whole other world, a pure substance, which we can visit and revisit or sort of inject over and over again without it ever getting old. MGS3 builds up the idea of MGS itself as what postmodernists call a grand narrative, a religious-like system of symbols that help the masses interpret and, well, distort reality. MGS4 brought that grand narrative, which it literalizes into an actual system, crashing down, as now not Solid but Old Snake must put, in classic fourth wall breaking postmodern fashion, his own franchise to rest.
Everything you see today stems from their Cold War. Differences in race, in religion, in ideology. This war they've caused is no different from any other human error in history. It all started with a tiny fork in the path and grew into a great rift.
MGS5 brought this already postmodern series again into unprecedented new highs, as truth itself, in postmodern fashion in Metal Gear Solid 5, becomes relative, and we are given at the end a quote by the grandfather of postmodern philosophy, Friedrich Nietzsche, saying, "Facts do not exist, only interpretations." I could say more, but covering all the ways that MGS5 represents a postmodern masterpiece, covering all the ways that any of these games are, each one could be a video topic unto itself. By its end, the series would also explore the Cold War, World War II, and beyond. But unlike other war-based franchises with a modern setting like Call of Duty, MGS at its core was always a postmodern work of art, with its weird characters, mind-bending plot twists, numerous fourth wall breaks, and outrageous hyper-real intersections between reality and fiction. The MGS games remained all the way to the last Kojima-directed title, 2015's Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain, completely wedded to the postmodern tradition. Kojima never stopped making the MGS games subversive and unusual and self-aware. And that postmodern conceit has only intensified with his most recent game series, Death Stranding. Death Stranding is a surreal masterpiece of postmodern art, just as 2001's Metal Gear Solid 2: Sons of Liberty was. And both of them, not so coincidentally, are influenced by postmodern literature. Metal Gear Solid 2, as well as 5 actually, use character names and some ideas from Paul Auster's postmodern novel, The New York Trilogy, while 2019's Death Stranding opens with a crucial quote by Japanese postmodern writer Kobo Abe. Both MGS2 and Death Stranding represent exemplary works of what might be called Hideo Kojima's singular brand of postmodern science fiction. In MGS2, players often can't tell apart military simulation from reality. In Death Stranding, meanwhile, the mysterious effects of so-called chiral contamination and the even more mysterious cataclysmic event at the heart of the game, the Death Stranding, have broken down all common-sense notions of space, time, and, well, society. Its postmodern character is evinced in the game's playful, trickster nature, as its strange, time and space-bending story subverts the very basic logic of cause and effect, with events having their impact felt beginning, paradoxically, in the past, affecting the state of the world before they even took place. Policenauts perhaps started this focus on the subject of strange theoretical occurrences on the fringes of science like quantum time dilation, but Death Stranding uses the principles of mysterious avant-garde science like quantum and particle physics to great effect. Death Stranding, like prior Hideo Kojima games, loves to play with the hyper-reality of age so that characters show up at different ages or in different bodies in the same story. MGS2 began an obsession with creating a fully realized hyper-reality, one, as I said, realer than real, where for instance every single bottle in this famous sequence is breakable and each pan here rings out a different musical note. By Death Stranding, this postmodern ideal gets conveyed in its postmodern, post-apocalyptic America, rendered by the titular catastrophe, the Death Stranding absolutely unrecognizable geographically, often resembling less the United States and more far-off remote places like Iceland or New Zealand. Death Stranding, like the rest of his games, as I've already sort of said, I could do a whole video on how it's postmodern. But the game's bizarre dream logic, its playful offbeat sense of humor, and all the ways it breaks the fourth wall to reference other game franchises like Battlefield, Mortal Kombat, Spider-Man, or even Metal Gear Solid, well, it's all textbook Kojima brand postmodern fourth wall breaking. But from Snatcher and Policenauts to Metal Gear Solid to Death Stranding, Hideo Kojima's games always feature labyrinthine conspiratorial plots that sort of echo our extremely hard to understand modern world, that reward multiple playthroughs with their many, many layers of depth. But these are works of fiction we often have to grapple with as though they were serious and real, with our complete undivided attention across playthroughs to ever fully understand. This has the tendency to create an almost cultish obsession with Hideo Kojima's games.
ゴジラスネーク聞こえるかオタコン
ああ聞こえるよだけど僕はオタコンじゃない僕は小島秀夫だ
何
スネーク実はまずいことになっているんだ何者かが何かを企んでいるようなんだ彼らはメタルギアソリッドが単なるフィクションであるっていう証拠をつかもうとしている
奴らの正体を調べる必要があるな
あそうだ彼らはついさっきこのディスクを送りつけてきたもしかしたらこの中に答えが隠されているかもしれないまあおおよその見当がついていると思うかね
Which explains, of course, the existence of my entire channel, and it's all quintessentially postmodern, epitomizing the hyperreality concept, as for many such as myself, these games and their hyper-real worlds sometimes mean more, matter more, make sense more than real, actual history.
Call me Otacon.
Otacon?
It stands for Otaku Convention. And otaku's a guy like me who likes Japanimation. Japan was the first country to successfully make bipedal robots. They're still the best in the field of robotics.
And Japanese cartoons played some part in that?
They did. I didn't get into science to make nuclear weapons, you know.
That's what all scientists say.
I became a scientist because I wanted to make robots like the ones in the Japanese animes. Really, it's true.
Just sounds like a childish excuse to me.
Games like MGS have become the paradigm for how potentially millions of players see the world. And ironically, just like its own characters, like Hal, Otacon, Emmerich, some of MGS's biggest fans have entered related fields that they learned about from this game, like AI, robotics, or, the military and intelligence operations. Ultimately, Hideo Kojima's postmodern philosophy is about recognizing the 21st century as a place and time where fiction has come to matter more than fact, where our conventional, traditional narratives to explain the world no longer apply, but which we cling to ever tighter, where all we really have is at bottom faith that what we think we see and understand is actually reality. Kojima deserves recognition as maybe the most important postmodern artist in history, and he's been identifying his games in that particular oeuvre going all the way back to Snatcher. Until next time, boss.
It doesn't matter if they were real or not. That's never the point. There's no such thing in the world as absolute reality. Most of what they call real is actually fiction. What you think you see is only as real as your brain tells you it is.
Then, what am I supposed to believe in? What am I going to leave behind when I'm through?
We can tell other people about having faith. What we had faith in. What we found important enough to fight for. It's not whether you were right or wrong, but how much faith you were willing to have. That decides the future.